Alright guys, let's go right to it. So today, I'm going to talk to you about my own Pietà. Yeah, I'm taking steps towards my childhood dream, become a new Asian Michelangelo. But, with this Pietà, with you seeing my process, this has a long story to me. 2024 was a year of newness for me. Alright, so today I'll talk about not just 2024, but a whole story of trust, accepting your fate. As you see in the Pietà, Mother Mary accepts her fate, or as I call it, God's will. So let's start a year ago, or like the beginning of 2024, I felt completely unfulfilled. I've always been an artist, right? I was pretty much born an artist. My mom liked to tell me that since I was 2, I would just draw for hours in my room. And yeah, that just continued on. I've always wanted to be a new Michelangelo, and I dreamed that one day I can be like a new him and create my own Pietà. But after graduating college, specifically UC Berkeley in 2019, I was the epitome of a starving artist. I was living at home, I was unemployed, and although I was succeeding in getting more art commissions and being recognized, I was not making enough money to move out and be able to sustain myself. I felt almost hopeless, having a past where I was a lot more successful, such as being second in my high school class and making it into a prestigious art school, which for me, people like me who lived outside of San Francisco, was a 5% acceptance rate. And of course, I made it to UC Berkeley, a good school. So I felt that I was a failure and my efforts in the past were worthless. So I just kind of faced a few years of feeling this way, almost hopelessness. Years in which I felt stagnant, and even after COVID, I still made little progress in my life maturity. I had no confidence in anything anymore, well, except art, but even that my confidence in art was starting to fall. And I felt like a man who had a promising future and just lost it all. I was a man who didn't know what his dream was, and I started to lose my trust in God and His will. Of course, I was still doing good things. I was mainly doing sacred art commissions. But after a year, despite growing success and getting more commissions, I still felt a huge hole in my heart. I didn't know what it was. And then I found out that it was a desire for independence. Don't get me wrong, I love my family. But independence was also so important to me. Even more important than my art. When I was a young boy, English was not my first language, and in fact, Cantonese was. So, in elementary school, in kindergarten, a translator would walk around with me, an actual Chinese lady, and translate all the English into Cantonese just so I could understand. And it was a bit embarrassing, man. I mean, wow. Yeah, but it pushed me to learn English. However, while I didn't have friends when I was young, because due to language barrier, I'd spend the recesses alone and would just walk around by myself and draw by myself. And sometimes I'd go to a library and just study. So, that was my childhood, and my story of how I decided to get my independence back started with the passing of my Gong Gong, which is grandfather in Cantonese. He was a true inspiration for me. He was the epitome of independence. He left his hometown of Toisan, China, to Hong Kong for a better life by getting a better education. He then came to the US around the 1960s for better opportunities and survived by opening a dry cleaning business. By the end of his life, he owned a good amount of properties and was very comfortable financially, to the point he was very free and traveled the world with my grandmother. Honestly, my grandfather and I didn't always have the best relationship, as he was a very strict man. And for the first 2 years after my college graduation, when I started my art business, I'd always be in close proximity to him since my art studio was at my grandparents' house. And we would argue a lot. I said things to him which I now very, very much regret. But as I got to know him more and just saw how much he helped me and cared, we got closer, and I'll talk to him about everything. I'll talk about my nerdy linguistic obsessions, especially when I was learning Italian.
Mamma mia.
My cringy obsessions with crushes, which I'm different now, right? That's a couple years ago.
Weirdo.
And my dreams and everything you can think of. He would also tell me stories from his own life, including his past life in China and how some girl in Hong Kong ditched him at a school dance around the 1950s.
No!
I came to very much love him for who he was. Of course, my gongong, my grandfather. But above all, he was a superhero. And superheroes, such as Michelangelo and Bruce Lee, are those who are warriors of independence, fighting for the good without concern for the approval of the world. Sadly, when we got more and more close, he got sick with a bleeding problem and eventually passed away at the beginning of 2024. One thing I remember he told me before he passed was this: if you want to go somewhere, just go. And actually, I followed this piece of advice a year before he even said this. In 2023, I decided to take my first leap towards independence and went on a 1-month trip to Italy, as that is the home country of my childhood hero, Michelangelo. In that month of traveling to Italy, I mainly traveled to Rome, Florence, and Venice, the Trinity. When I was in Florence, I felt a need to check out art schools around me and remembered that I had an Instagram friend who attended the Sacred Art School of Firenze. And so, I checked it out. And from that moment, I stepped into the school and students were just very welcoming. And the staff was just so helpful in telling me how I can enroll in the school. And so, when I came back to the United States, I knew I had to concentrate all my energy into going to that school. For some reason, I just knew that school would bring me to a better life. In fact, I mentioned the school so many times that I was annoying my mother with my repetitive mention of it. Now don't get me wrong, my mother was very supportive in me enrolling, but I was just so sure for some reason that the school would help my life. So around January 2024, the application for the 2024 master's program was finally open, and I applied to the Sacred Art School of Firenze. And then shortly got accepted, and April 2024, this year, I went in and moved to Italy alone to attend the master's program there. Now my gongong, he knew about my plan to study in Italy before he passed. And that deeply saddened me because I can no longer physically tell him, Gongong, I'm gonna make you proud. And I cannot show him the successes I had in Italy. And that deeply saddened me. But beyond my gongong, I also came to Florence for a mixture of other reasons. Practical reasons, that is. One was to get a master's degree for practical reasons, so I can get a stable job in teaching fine art with enough income to be what every man eventually needs to do, to be financially independent and to live on his own. The second was to learn what true independence means in the best place possible for me. Italy was the place I can be inspired by seeing art from the great masters, especially Michelangelo, and a place where the cultural and linguistic difference would be a great challenge for me to learn how to be independent. Living on my own, cooking for myself, doing all the chores, dealing with bureaucracy all on my own, especially that Italian bureaucracy, man, it was really slow. Now I can tell you, it was hard for me at first being so independent. Even at times when it was painfully hard, I loved every second of it. I made many mistakes, but I made more right decisions than I ever did in my life, simply because I was practicing the art of making my own decisions. I met many people and saw many things that changed my view of the world, and I saw how big and beautiful God made the world. A bonus is that I got Italian underwear and a Thomas Aquinas book in Italian. Great souvenirs. And I even made this YouTube channel documenting Italian travels with funny art skits, which, of course, guys, I really enjoy. Now upon my newfound independence, my spiritual director, Father Anthony, was calling this year a year of success. So I was succeeding in school, becoming more independent, and I had a nice YouTube channel with you guys. But I still had one big worry. How will I continue my independent lifestyle after school ends? And so I started to apply to many jobs, looking for any art-related or teaching-related job that can sustain myself financially for this independent lifestyle that I enjoyed so much. Now, with great intention, I eventually went about applying to almost every art or teaching job under the sun, except for those in the Bay Area, where I'm from. As I thought that immersing myself in the most foreign environments would make it more challenging for me, and thus more of a man. I applied to jobs all over the Midwest, East Coast, Italy, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan. When I was telling my mother about my struggle and anxiety over this, she told me to be open to opportunities all over, including the Bay Area, as the Bay Area may be where God is calling me back to. She wisely told me I can still live independently close by. Now, being as stubborn as I was, it took me time to accept that. But eventually I came around and became open to the possibility. Suddenly, by chance, my sister found the perfect job opportunity for me at the last second. It was to teach at a Catholic high school in San Francisco, a private one. They needed a new classical art teacher. I figured, despite my desires to work in a more exotic environment and for full-time work, as it was a part-time job, I decided to apply, and just in the course of a week, I got the job in the second interview. Honestly, came in applying to the job with a thought that I'd probably choose another job that was full-time, which I thought honestly was the only situation I can practice independence. But the God moment was this. The interviewer told me to tell him what I was honestly looking for. So I was honest. I told him I was looking for a full-time job so I can financially sustain myself. In response to this, I was offered teacher's housing and more hours. I just couldn't believe it. I would have access to the independent life I wanted, living on my own, but also the perfect job of teaching sacred classical art, which was exactly what I studied at Sacred Art School. So I took the job offer and told the interviewer, "Oh, you don't know how happy I am." The night I got the job, I couldn't sleep until 4 a.m. But it wasn't that simple. Shortly before that, I got a job offer to teach English in Taiwan, and a little afterwards, I got an offer to teach English in Japan. And it took me time, especially to the Japan offer. But I said no to both offers, so I realized I still wanted to be close to my family. Both of those jobs had less than 2 weeks of vacation days, which, although I love independence, not seeing my family for that long would make me cry and eventually very depressed. So, in saying all this final Pietà painting was painted as my final project for my master's course at Sacred Art School. Now, it's not just a Pietà painting. It's a painting dedicated to my mother. If you look at the painting, you see Mother Mary has a very sorrowful gaze. But that same gaze also indicates that she accepts God's will, despite it being hard. I mean, her son, Christ, is dead on her arms, but she knows that it's part of God's ultimate plan for the salvation of humankind. And my mother taught me to do just that, to accept God's plan, both the good and bad of life, and taught me that everything works for the mechanism of God's beautiful plan for us. Now, it took me a while to learn this, but I learned that, there's such thing as being too extreme. I had a very extreme views on independence, and I would say I became more moderate as I saw the beauty of family support, especially for my mom when I was alone in Italy. In fact, when I was pretty extreme, I listened to a lot of French Revolution songs. Now, speaking of France, after I presented my final Pietà project to the Sacred Art School panel, which surprisingly, the panel gave me cum laude marks, making me and my best friend the top of the class for the master's program this year. I was so surprised. But anyways, back to France. Well, I went to France as my last European adventure before I returned to the US for good. As life is full of surprises, I became good friends with another Sacred Art School classmate and visited her city during my visit in France. During my visit, she and I talked about God's will and cultural preservation. It all started with my story about a Vietnamese American man whom I was talking to, who told me that he has a lot of dating problems and only wants to date Vietnamese women. So I pretty much hinted to him that he should open up to other cultures and ethnicities, as culture and ethnicity is not as important compared to God's will and getting closer to God. My French friend responded to me, telling me that there's beauty to cultural preservation too, and that the ideology that we are all children of the world is problematic. I honestly didn't completely understand her point at first, but because I had so much respect and admiration for her and her intelligence, her depth. I went back to my hostel that night and thought about it, and it all came to me. I realized that God is not going to look down and love me because I'm Chinese. He will love me because I'm a child of God, and likewise everyone else. I agree that the ideology that we are all children of the world is problematic because it ignores the beauty of cultural preservation. But more importantly, I think it's wrong because it should be, we are all children of God. If we think that way, we place God first in our lives, and honestly, this mentality has brought me out of my anxiety and sadness I had for years before going to sacred art school. I found out that the world changes all the time, and things flow like a river, and we are simply fish swimming in its current. Humankind used to be fish. It's science. But if those first fish never got closer and closer to the land, none of humankind would exist. And obviously we didn't preserve our fishness, but we are living an even greater gift. We are living as loved children of God. And from Genesis, that we know that the gift is only reserved for humans. Heck, Jesus incarnated as a human. Who knows, maybe my great grandchildren, times 20, will be 8-foot giants with big eyes who speak Martian, no longer Chinese. Would I love them any less? No. I would smile from heaven. Our ancestors from eons ago were all from Africa. And yeah, me being Asian, my friend being white, I'm sure those African ancestors would love us all the same. Not all changes are good, but I think that natural change is beautifully good, and thus a natural part of God's plan. When we die, we will all become bone, and then completely decompose into nothing, as microorganisms would have consumed all of our energy. Change is always sad, scary, and obviously this is something that we often don't want. But Bruce Lee says this:
like everyone else, you want to learn the way to win, but never to accept the way to lose, to accept defeat, to learn the dies, to be liberated from it. So when tomorrow comes, you must free your ambitious mind and learn the art of dying. So anyway, as funny as that is, we can learn a lot from that. As accepting God's will, accepting the art of dying, as death is part of God's will. It's part of life. Life is full of things that remain beautifully the same, but yet life is also full of natural changes. And that can be scary and hard, but in the end, it forms us into bringing to what is best for us. And that is why I painted the Pietà. It's a scene that exemplifies the acceptance of change that happens for the better good. And even more than acceptance, trust. Trust in that everything will work for the better good, which I see is God Himself. Thank you everyone, and Happy New Year.